This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. This is Series 3 of Platemark, in which I interview fabulous and wonderful people who occupy various roles in the print ecosystem. We're talking printers and artists and gallerists, print publishers. Maybe I'll even get to conservators one day. That'd be cool. Today's guest is Jillian Ross. She is a printer who, for a long time, lived in Johannesburg, South Africa, and was the head of the shop at David Krut Workshop, who is the primary producer of William Kentridge's work. In fact, Kentridge's studio is right next door to David Krut Workshop. She has some really wonderful stories about collaboratively working with Kentridge, who, if you don't know him, you will by the end of this episode. And I think it's really an interesting lesson about being open and amenable to changing and using mistakes to do something else. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, let's see. Housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Jill and I talk about will be over on the show notes, as you know, at platemarkpodcast.com. Also, please hit the support and donate button. Help me keep the lights on here at Platemark. I really appreciate it. All right, buckle up and let's get rolling. Jillian, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure.
I so appreciate it. Can you introduce yourself for everybody?
My name is Jillian Ross. I am a collaborative master printer. I spent a great number of years in Johannesburg, South Africa, running the David Krut Workshop from 2003 until 2020, when I returned to Canada, where I was born and raised, and have opened up my own collaborative studio in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, called Jillian Ross Print.
The first thing out of my mouth should be congratulations, because that's a huge undertaking.
Thank you. It has been a huge undertaking. In COVID was quite something.
How long did it take you to set everything up?
I arrived in Saskatchewan in March 2020, and I worked out of a cooperative studio called Articulate Inc. for almost a year's time. And then when I moved to Saskatoon from Regina and opened up, our company, it took a year to open. And then the studio itself, we worked out of a basement studio in our home in Saskatoon for another year as we moved between university campuses across Western Canada. So when I needed to be, it's a much longer story, but
well, guess what? We have time.
The studio is myself and my husband, Brendan Copestake. He is the vital other arm. I am the printmaker, and he on occasion is my clean hands, but really is actually the man who runs the studio, the man who built the studio itself. So now we're in a double garage space on our property. So we have within 3 years gone from no studio, a cooperative studio, to a basement studio that was just for editioning, into a studio space where we now employ 2 other people. It's been fantastic.
Oh, what?
So,
what? 2 people? My God, that's great.
Yes, and now we're again, we kind of keep growing outside of our space, and now we need even a bigger space from there. So more than anything, I kind of look at our home studios as editioning spaces, and have grown to think as big as I can think and work in these much larger studios at the University of Alberta. As an example, I did a workshop at Emily Carr in Vancouver, 2021. And then I've been working out of the U of A campus for the last 4 years, actually, every summer. And then with projects that once the plates are made at the University of Alberta, then they're shipped to Johannesburg. And then we're working with the DKW studio in Johannesburg. And we've been home now on 2 different projects. We've just returned 2 weeks ago. So I'm thinking as big as I can think, in the way that I'm working in multiple studios with multiple printers from all of these different spaces where we make work, and then different arms edition the work. And then the work is located between here in Canada as well as in South Africa, where naturally it should be.
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, so maybe explain your relationship with David Krut's Workshop.
Oh, that's a pleasure to do. I moved to Johannesburg in 2003. And 3 weeks after I arrived, I started volunteering at David Krut Workshop. There was one printmaker in the back, and I was the clean hands. and the intern. And within a few months, I was the manager of the studio, and a year and a half, 2 years later, was running the studio and head collaborator on all of the print projects. And then I had the pleasure of seeing and participating in that print shop growing and growing and growing. I learned a lot from David Krut as a print publisher, project creation, and then I worked with over 100 artists over the 17 years, and William Kentridge being the artist that I've had the pleasure of working with the most.
The most closely.
The most closely, yeah.
All right, so before we get back to David Krut, South Africa, Johannesburg, and William Kentridge, because, of course, we have to talk about them, how'd you figure out you were an artist? Because really, a printer is an artist in the end. And where did you go to school?
I think it's funny, even if someone still asks me if I'm an artist, I never say yes. I kind of sidestep around it. I don't know why. I think sometimes because when you say you're an artist, that shuts down a conversation with a lot of people. I think they're never quite sure. Yes. They're never quite sure what questions to ask. I also think it's because there's a way with being a printmaker where it's this constant dialogue as to who is the artist. So it's just not trying to step on any toes there. And so saying that you're the technician as well as an artist. So to me, it's both. But anyways, I studied at the University of Saskatchewan, where I am now, in Saskatoon, and I took 2 years of introductory printmaking classes with Charles Ringnes, who actually was a master printer who worked with Rauschenberg. And when I look into the archives, it's quite amazing, actually, as to what he accomplished. And since being back in Canada, I've had quite a number of different master printers I've met. Well, there aren't as many in Canada, but those that are do praise Chuck for his unbelievable layering accomplishments. If anyone couldn't make something happen, Chuck could.
Oh, wow.
That to me is quite something to think about. And also at the same time, he used to say that he worked with Rauschenberg, and I had no understanding at the time what that meant. I didn't understand that master printer was a job. I didn't understand that printmaking could be done in collaboration with artists. I loved making work, but I didn't want to ever come up with the ideas. So what I like more than anything is being able to work in this capacity where I add to an idea. I helped to make something happen. So when I arrived in Johannesburg in 2003, I had just graduated. I spent a year in Taiwan with my husband, and we arrived in Johannesburg not knowing anything. I had a love-hate relationship with printmaking from the get-go. Find the technical would get in the way all of the time about what I wanted to do. And so I couldn't control it. I didn't really understand it. I was good at it, but I found it frustrating. So I would never have thought that I would end up being in print. I started as a volunteer at David Krut Workshop. I didn't meet David for 3 months. So he just said, come on in, work in the back. He was quite amazing. And when he came back, he just said, well, this fits. This works really nicely. I think my Canadian sensibilities at the time, very diplomatic, kind of fit in. So I was the go-between between he and the printer, which, as you know, often you need, so that you understand the technical and then you understand the publishing or the selling aspects and artist relations and things like that. So I never found it boring. I couldn't stop once I got into it. And I, more than anything else, I was, I guess, self-trained. The printer that was in the studio at the time, I learned quite a bit from, but he moved on and opened his own studio about a year and a half after I arrived. So I kind of had to teach myself what to do, how to make things work. And then eventually I was running a team of 3 of us. Because I'm from Canada, I would often go home and I would work in different studios as I returned. David would help to set up internships, possibilities for me in New York. So at the Lower East Side print shop, I was there. I didn't, where else did I go? To 107 Workshop in the UK to work with Jack Sheriff, who David published works with for a very long time, 20 years. And then I spent, I don't know how many different 1-week trips, as many as I could fit in, going through New York, going through Toronto, different places in Europe, and I always visited the print studios. I always asked as many questions as possible. I kind of would pretend I didn't know anything sometimes, just so I could ask the basics. And because mostly I felt as though I was self-taught, it's always that kind of, well, I'm not quite sure. So maybe someone can give me just the confidence of saying, yes, you're doing it correctly. And then by 2008, David Krut met Phil Sanders. And he regularly started visits to Johannesburg, which is where we really all started growing even more substantially. So I've worked with Phil on quite a number of different projects, starting from 2008, and I think 4 other visits, as well as me visiting him at the Elizabeth Foundation at Robert Blackburn Studio, also on 1 or 2 visits to New York.
What's rolling through my mind is this is all pre-kids. Like, I don't know how you could do this with a small and growing family, you know?
I have 2 children. One is turning 10 this year, and the other has just turned 6.
Whew.
I have to say that all of that was done with them next to me. So David Krut allowed our kids to be growing up in the print studio. So both of my boys, there's a nursery space that was next door that we set up, and we would have help that would obviously come and watch over our boys throughout the day, but I got to spend time with them. So they roamed. They're very naturally comfortable in that studio in Johannesburg. They come in and out. The staff know them very well. And we have just tried. It's not easy, but it's also beautiful having little people under the tables, animals, little people. It is just, I don't know, you also realize that in this career, the hours are not 9 to 5. The relationships matter. Building your life into the work matters. It means that you can much more easily navigate, 1, your own passions, but 2, the family ties that kind of keep you in collaborative spaces and relationships. It's also easier on the senses. You know, we're making art. We're not doctors. We're not. So it's okay, I think.
Okay, so that didn't happen in the museum world. So maybe that's why I'm so attracted to the print shop spaces, because it just seems like, depending on who the owner is and what kind of relationship they have with their own families and dogs and pets and whatever, like the generosity within the shop, it can change or make or break your experience there. And to have, found yourself in a space that welcomed that and that enabled you to make it work is, it's not unique, but it's pretty special.
It was very special. We also, in South Africa, it wasn't as though we were going to take a year off for a maternity leave or anything like that. I love the work that I do, and I love raising children, and I also think it takes a village. And when we were living in South Africa, we didn't have that village except for our friends and the artists of which we work with. So to me, the fact that David was able to open that space to having children around, he absolutely loved it, actually. And the same with William and the team of people in that studio. It's life. It's what happens. And it's not really all that easy to separate the two. And I know that as I said, is an enormous privilege to have been able to have that experience rather than having to separate the two. And I don't know how people have done it otherwise. Really, it is quite a difficult thing, and so early in lives,
Are your kids showing artistic bents?
Our oldest has had enough for the moment. He's no longer really all that interested in going to the art openings, but loves to draw. So it is part of his life. He also does understand how to do silkscreen and lino cuts. And so with his school here in Saskatoon, they were recently at the Ramey Modern doing some of the doing styrofoam prints, and his friends turned to him because I arrived and he said, well, my mom does this for a job. And they said, what? You can do this for a job? And they were absolutely blown away. And that was the first time that his friends kind of looked at me in a different vein. And with the youngest, he absolutely loves it. So he's still in the thralls of it. And I'll be doing a silkscreen workshop with his kindergarten class on Friday.
Oh, fun.
I think I started doing workshops in Johannesburg mostly because, well, one, I find it so much fun. I find just the reaction of watching little children and how excited they get, that is what artists look like, I have to say, like the whole time in the printmaking studio. So to allow a little, an expanding mind, not a little mind, an expanding mind, the opportunity to try when they're really young, I think is valuable. And I think that a lot of schools don't have art classes until high school. And if no one else is going to show them, then very obviously I'm going to show them. I'd love to. So we've made liner cuts and we give them away instead of candy bags for birthday parties.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So I'm growing art collections.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. My kids never expressed an interest. In fact, I never really even dragged them to museums as we traveled all over the place. But now as they're adults, they're 25 and 23, just having that in their background, suddenly they'll say something. I'm like, oh, actually, this is all coming back. It's all coming back. So I have faith.
I think that's perfect, actually, because dragging them to museums doesn't always help. I've tried.
Nope. Yeah. Not my kids.
Yeah.
How many times can you say hands in pockets?
What I loved is in Joburg, we would have an exhibition of work around the children's workshops. Only once did we have little footprints on one of the prints. Perhaps we should think about this a little bit more. But it came off.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Yeah. What are the capabilities of the shop in Saskatoon?
There was a cooperative studio, the studio Articulate Ink in Regina, and they had been open for 10 years. And the majority of the work that they did was silkscreen based, but they did have an etching press and etching equipment, as well as letterpress equipment. And they actually approached me and said, so it's a combination of kind of how I moved to Canada and how we ended up setting up a studio, is that they said to me, we have not been using this equipment. Would you consider purchasing it? And I thought, oh, I hadn't thought of opening my own studio. I thought I was in Canada for the first year was just to spend time with my family during COVID. And I had a project at Griffin Art Projects in Vancouver, a residency that I had been trying to set up with the curator there, Lisa Baldessera, for 10 years. And so I finally had that opportunity in 2020. So through those circumstances, my parents were also in Johannesburg when COVID started closing borders, and they were told as Canadians to come home. And they didn't want us, like, we didn't have family. It would have been Brendan and myself with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old trying to navigate. And we would have had some help, but it would have been vastly different. So we thought we were coming home for 3 months. And then we started to realize that travel back and forth was not possible. 2 little ones too, and you didn't have any understanding as to how they'd be affected long term. So we just sat still. We did the residency in Vancouver. Then when Articulate Ink said to us, do you want to purchase this equipment? We kind of slowly but surely realized that maybe that was what was going to happen. We knew that we would be able to travel back and forth to Johannesburg, but we very quickly realized that if we wanted to be moving projects between the 2 countries, that we had to live and work here for at least a few years' time to start to grow the network of people that we could over time work with. And the nurturing relationship that we've had with David Krut Workshop. Anna May Bell, the gallery director at David Krut Projects, and Liz in New York, as well as William and William's whole entire studio, and the artists of whom we've been working with for 20 years. So we've decided, okay, we will purchase the equipment. And even if we had to put it in storage here, so be it. So we do have the facilities for etchings, for making etchings. We have a steel-facing tank in our basement. It's just, not everyone can say that. And then my residency, because at the time it was my residency before we started Jillian Ross Print at Griffin Art Projects, was an exhibition that we had of works of Williams that was from the David Krut Workshop archive. And it not only was some liner cut prints from the Universal Archive series, it was also etchings from the Nose series. And we did bring over to Vancouver a fully printed giant Triumphs and Laments woodcut print. So that my residency actually had all of the tearing templates and the registration templates hanging around me. And I tore up all of the sheets from the printed panels into the 77 pieces of paper that make up this 3.5-meter long diptych titled Refugees. So it took me a month in studio, in situ. The prints arrived from Johannesburg, kind of all flat, perfect, kind of in a nice flat pack like this. And then I just sat and cut and tore it all up. So once we had finished that particular piece, Brendan, my husband's background is in project management and public sculpture and museums and exhibitions. And he was the technical director for the installation of the Venice Biennale, the South African pavilion, for the last 4 iterations. He worked with the Apartheid Museum and the Capture Site Museum in Johannesburg and Howick, South Africa. So he is the arm that understands all of the other parts, and I am the arm that understands the making. So very naturally, we worked on that exhibition together with Lisa Baldessera. He also has interests in the truth and reconciliation, and obviously, having worked at the Apartheid Museum and Nelson Mandela Capture Site in Howick, he and Lisa Baldessera have also kind of been slowly working on some sort of exhibition that would involve truth and reconciliation and the comparisons between South Africa and Canada, also for the last 8 years. So very naturally, we worked together on the Colander exhibition in Vancouver, and we had a fantastic time doing that. And then once we started, I'm sorry, it's so hard to explain it all. It's just long. But so he started assisting, obviously, on the planning of that exhibition, and we worked very closely with the Kentridge studio, and they allowed us to share quite a number of the films that William was working on in 2019, 2020. So we had a whole history of prints that were created from 2007. We had drawings from the 1990s, and it was based on collections across Canada. And then the prints from the David Krut Workshop. So the exhibition, people couldn't quite understand where it came from. So I had a wonderful response because the majority of people didn't know William's print work in Vancouver. And the last time William had an exhibition there was in 2001. But people were quite taken with the fact that they had this at their doorstep and couldn't quite understand how it all came together. So with the residency space, people were able to come and go through appointment only, but they got to see a little bit of the magic that we show audiences in DKW all the time, in Joburg. So that exhibition allowed us a platform over a year to try to figure out how we can take some of the work from South Africa and then be able to exhibit it in different parts of Canada. So it kind of set the tone for us setting up the studio. And then William also planted an idea one day. When we were all in all of these lockdowns, David Krut Workshop couldn't go into the studio for, I think, 2 months. I was sitting behind a computer. I would get up in the morning at 3:30, start work with South Africa, 4 a.m. every day for a year, pretty much. And William said to me, I don't understand. No, he didn't say I don't understand. He said, you can't sit behind a computer. This doesn't make any sense. I said, but I don't know what, where and what? And he said, well, photogravure. What does anyone in South Africa do photogravure? He said, yes, Shanae Warren in Cape Town. He said, okay. And does anyone work in Canada large scale in photogravure? So that, honestly, that one moment, William and I were sending a lot of WhatsApp texts. It was quite an emotional journey. He just kept saying, please don't tell me you're not coming back. Please don't tell me. Our studios have been side by side at Arts on Main in downtown Johannesburg for over 10 years. So we saw each other on a daily basis. It's not a relationship that is just work. We are friends. We enjoy the work we do. We enjoy just the continuity. I think it's those trusting relationships. You can't explain them to other people, but I do notice that especially as you're allowing people the space in which to talk about them, people can actually start to understand. Is that you don't stop growing together. When you're working together, there's a joy in it. And you understand it's all in your hands. It's in your minds, it's in your memories, it's in your muscle memories. You just understand how each other works. And that's, I think, the most important thing. So William planted the seed, and I started a project as the kind of the middle person to assist the David Krut Workshop to work with Jillian Warren, who I'd worked with since 2005. There's a huge network of different studios in South Africa, and I know all the printers. We've been working kind of in parallel for such a long time. So I reached out to her. William would send the photos to me. Her and I would discuss how the plates get made. And then the plates would be shipped to Johannesburg, and Kimberly Logenberg, who is a fantastic printer, she did all the proofing. I just provided the ink details and those kinds of things to start the project. And then it records, as a visual documentary, it records the journey of William's episodic film series titled Self-Portrait as a Coffee Pot. So William began a film series in the lockdown, and through a series of texts. Lockdown began in the middle of March, and by not even the middle of April, William said, I think I've embarked on my next film series. I'm not entirely sure, but perhaps. And he started sharing these photographs from, he was in lockdown on his own, which is very unusual, obviously, for him. He had his sculpture and technical assistant, Chris Waldo DeVette, was living on the property at the time. So he actually did the filming as William started any number of animated sequences and drawings and just his experiences during COVID. He started looking at Morandi's work, and so he would set up these still lifes and start these big charcoal drawings. And Chris was documenting this through film as well as photography. And so some of the photographs of what William saw during that time, as well as what William was doing during that time, formed the Studio Life series of photogravure plates that Jillian Warren was making in Cape Town and that DKW was printing in Johannesburg. And then William started sharing some of the artworks. So the charcoal drawings that came from the Morandi Studio Life setups. And that's what he would share with me. So I found, Brendan actually, found Stephen Dixon at the University of Alberta, who is a specialist in photogravure, but does not teach it at the university, but has been working in this medium for 35 years. And so when we approached him saying, we have a work that we would like to make in photogravure, do you have time to do so? He said yes. We had 5 days in studio in September 2020. Before the students started back at school, they were barely allowed back in. So behind masks, we kind of arrived and we made we made from 4 different sheets of paper, we made one work titled 8 Vessels. So it was made from these overlapping sheets because it's the same type of process I've been working on with these more sculptural prints of Williams with a lot of layered pieces of paper, and then exploring the technique of photogravure. So we pushed the image as big as we could that first year, and then with the idea to come back the next year to start working on something much larger. But with the understanding that we have to work in small scale before we can work in big. And also to grow a new technical team. I kind of work in between these technical teams as the master printer. My role has always been to work the same way that William works in his studio, and you're guiding different teams of people to allow them to find unique moments, to find things to focus on, to allow a lot of people into the room so that ideas grow and expand and are nurtured. So we work with a team of 3 technicians at the University of Alberta. Brendan and I project manage the plates being made, and we push and pull kind of as many options for making the plates as we can. And then we work with William in situ. Once travel was much easier, then we go to find him to work in the studio together. Because it's the only way you can actually make the work. Over COVID, we had to ship things through the mail like letters. Sometimes that's okay, but it's not nearly the pleasure as it is working together in the studio. Sorry, long story. Long story.
It's okay. So there's so much in it. Does William feel like the making of the work is as important as the work? Is he one of those sorts of artists?
William loves being part of all of the parts of making as production. So his biggest joy, I think, is responding. So there's always an idea, a seed that's planted. And then it's through allowing other people to kind of explore what might be possible. I guess through all of these different projects of which I've worked on with him, they're all different techniques. Each project, I'm in my fourth one right now. Each are about 4 years exploration of a technique, with a lot of other projects that happen at the same time with other artists as well as with William himself. But it's exploring what's possible. So we started in etching, and he loves etching. Etching actually is at the heart of his practice. He loves erasing. He loves manipulating the plates. So my understanding of that project that we did so many years ago actually is where you can see the joy. He loves it when the plate comes out the other side of the press. William will say to me, "Wow, that's so beautifully printed. I'm not sure about the drawing." And I will say, that drawing's fantastic. I'm not sure about the print. And so together it's always, it's that excitement that you feel. So it doesn't matter if the work is small or if it's big but it's the potential. And then through the next projects, I kind of grew to understand how to let go a little bit, allow other people space to come into the projects. And so other people would print, and then I would just manage the look and feel of the print. And then William would come in and tear them all up. And then we'd have to start all over, and I'd put them back together. And, so it was growing. It was kind of in small steps that he would always guide. He's always this far ahead of you, and you're always kind of trying to figure out where to go. And in that figuring out where to go, you find something that he hadn't thought about. So with the Triumphs and Laments, we made these giant woodcuts. We did the woodcuts because they were based on a frieze that was made along the stone wall of the Tiber River. So from a distance, they're black and white, but up close, they have this beautiful wood grain that emulates the natural patina on that stone wall. And it was intended never to go as large as we did, but through a series of tests, just in enlarging a face, we saw the potential in it. So it's moments like that. And if you make a mistake, William embraces them. It's about learning and then pushing something to the extreme. So once we were in Canada, I just kept thinking, okay, how big can we think? Because we have such restrictions right this moment. Okay, this is printmaking. We always have restrictions. So what do we do next? How do we make this work? And William's planting that seed. He said, can we make this giant tree 2 by 2 meters made out of multiple parts? Can we make that? He said that in April 2020, basically, or the summer 2020. And we did a test plate, and I was like, I don't know how to make that yet. I made artworks with 2 young female artists. One is a photographer, the other is a painter. So Cynthia Sifa Mulunga and Pule Mungale. I started testing layering with them through just the process of photogravure. So saying this is all the access I have right now because I don't have a studio of my own, but I can travel to the University of Alberta for all of the summer months and work there as much as possible. And so I started working with those 2 young women, and then I continued to work with William and layered and layered and layered the photogravure and direct gravure that I started exploring with him. All so that last summer we made the giant work 2 years later, made of 12 panels. I think that would be 12, 14, 15, 16, 20 plates, I think, and 200 kilograms of copper. We made the plates on behalf of William. We worked with Shawnee Warren from Cape Town. We worked with Stephen Dixon and the University of Alberta, Brendan and myself to make the plates. And we shipped them to Johannesburg, where we worked with William and Sabunga Seni, Kulu, Kimlee Logenberg, Roxy Kaczmarek, Sarah Judge, David, NMA, and all of William's studio, actually, to make a big tree made out of photogravure, direct gravure, scratched with dry point, aquatints added, spit bite, and 67 pieces of paper. Some hand-painted by William, some little collage elements, some sheen clay. So what we did is that Brendan and I work as the guides to making the plates and making the decisions on behalf of William, with William always in conversation over WhatsApp and Zoom and letters in the mail, prints in the mail, and then we work all together to print at David Krut next to William's studio so that he comes and goes on a daily basis. So we went back to Johannesburg and were there for almost 2 months making that work last year.
And how many would be in an edition of that?
It's an edition of 20, and with the proofs,
Oh, God.
32. So that, to me, David Krut has always said to me, or actually Andrew Whitkin as well, who's been a very wonderful person to speak with that's more in tune to my current time zone. So I've been speaking with Andrew for quite a few years. David Krut introduced the two of us when I moved in 2021. And he has become my sounding board, my new mentor in North America, after having the experience of David and William ongoing and Phil ongoing. But Andrew's said to me, you know, the success of big work is for it to be made much more easily than the way you've made some of the works previously. And I said, okay, so I constantly think about that. How do we simplify? So the tree was a simplified. But when we all worked together at David Krut, it was such fun to hand paint these sheets of paper and the collage and the sheen collage. So William and the whole team of us just had such a great time adding to this photogravure base. So it just grew and grew. And then it grew into a series of a whole bunch of other direct gravure images too that were much smaller, and dry points and hand painting. And so we've kind of carried on, and that's what we're working on currently, is the next one.
Oh my God. I'm tired just thinking about it.
So I guess what it is though, you know, it's pushing it to the extreme, and then it's all of these offshoots. If someone says, okay, well, what do we do next? Then this image influences that image so that we can make the next one. Big, small. I can only do smaller works here in my studio, but I can layer them. And so I've had the time. I kind of look at here as like my sabbatical, actually. That's how I've started to figure this out for myself, is saying this is the time that I have to learn via teaching a new series of younger artists and printers on how to make these projects work. And then I just do it in a much smaller scale, but I love the complexity. So I work in layers.
What I'm thinking as a museum person is, if I were to have acquired one of these gigantic things that is multi pieces of paper, etc., like, does it arrive in a little stack and there's a map that tells me how to put it together? Or do you show up and do it, or does it come framed?
So in the first large works I made with William were linocut, and they were multiple pieces, and it was all attached and would come in this giant flat pack. But it was 2 meters, 2.5 meters long, which seemed a little bit crazy. And then the next project was the Triumphs and Laments, which do come in a much smaller pack, about a single sheet of a full sheet of paper. So which is still quite big, but it comes in a stack of prints that come with a map, so that the framing company, whoever does actually frame the work, gets the map, can lay it on the table and layer it all together. I wrote an instructions manual for that particular piece, which was quite a joy to do, and also to document how it was made. So I also made like an information booklet, so that people could just understand a little bit more as to why it was so complex. And then these last ones is a much smaller sheet, actually, and now only comes in 3 layers, and it's a much smaller package, and it comes with registration marks. So William does this very naturally. He's always puts his registration marks on all of his drawings. So I just made the suggestion, can we please make sure to add them? And then framing has become easier and easier.
It's really incredible. Like, it takes such printers, I'm sure, come in all forms and mindsets and skill levels and everything. But like the complex part of the making, and it's like you're a natural born registrar or something, because those folks have got it down. You know, like it's fascinating to talk to you, because it comes in. It's amazing to me how wide open the field is, really.
Well, a lot of framers, when I deliver the work, Anthony Schmidt from the framing company in South Africa, I've worked really closely with to make sure that everything that we were making made sense. And he struggled. He has been instrumental in how I approach how I make the works. And then also, I have to say that the last work that I delivered even was 4 sheets of paper, and the framer said, but don't you think that it would be much simpler if you made this all on a page? And I said, yes, yes, it would. but that's not the art, And so I'm sorry I didn't make the work for you. I just didn't. And I didn't mean it in a rude way or a flippant way at all. You just realize that a lot of those kind of conversations, and so I would say to younger artists, push through those conversations, because there has been something that is so interesting. My background, I love sculpture, so maybe it had something to do with that. I'm not entirely sure, but it's William's fault, really. Some of those works that we started tearing up and piecing back together in the Universal Archive, the Linocut series, they're just such fun to put them back together. So that project kind of inspired the next one. And now I'm, like I said, trying to simplify it, but not in simplifying the look of the work, the feel of the work. The projects we're making are just, when people can sit and unpack them and then read about them and understand maybe why, it's a joy. And so I had the most amazing conversations in Vancouver for the colander, when a collector, especially, he's since passed away, which saddens me. He was South African, and he is an uncle of an artist friend of mine, actually, in Johannesburg. And we met because of the love of the work. It had nothing to do with someone connecting the two of us. He just rather said, "Who are you?" I was in the exhibition and I said, "Well, I'm the printmaker. I'm just visiting." He said, "Oh, tell me about this. I don't understand this woodcut." And we spoke for 2 hours. And it's more those kinds of conversations. And so it's the feeling of the conversations we have with William in the studio, with David in the studio, saying, what now? Like, how does this work? And then it's just kind of grown and evolved. And it's been a wonderful journey, actually. And everything takes time to think about. And so that's where we find ourselves these days, is instead of trying to make as many works to keep us all busy, we're all busy working on different aspects. Yeah.
But this is making me wonder how you're making a living. If everything takes so long, like, does David pay you? How does it? I mean, we don't have to include this, but I'm just sort of curious, like, if it's a team in Alberta and Vancouver and Joburg and Saskatoon, and like, how in the world do people get paid?
It's not easy. But Brendan and I now co-publish the prints that we have made. So David Krut has taught us everything that we know. William carries on mentoring us. David does as well. So we are, we are investing in the work, which means that not only are we funding aspects, we fund the Canadian aspects of the project, and David Krut funds the South African aspects. And then we co-publish the prints. And then we have marketing streams in both places. We all understand how each other works, so we're just working as a team. We don't even have as many emails as we used to, because we're just trusting that the other party carries on moving forward. And I have to say that what a pleasure, really, because what they need to do in South Africa is different to what we need to do in Canada, but we're working in tandem. And then with Cynthia Sifamulanga and Pule Mungale, and I'm hoping that this extends into further artist work. We are teaching them a new technique that's not available to them in South Africa in the same way, because it's very expensive to make these plates. So we make them with a team of people over here so that we can share not only how this technique is done, but also with a new audience. And we are co-publishing those works with Lucy McGarry and Robbie Kochi from Latitudes Online, which is a fantastic duo who held an art fair in 2019 in Johannesburg, in parallel to the, I guess it's probably 12 or 15 years old, the Johannesburg Art Fair. And they have since held their second iteration that we just came back from South Africa now, which was absolutely groundbreaking in how it was, in the experience of it, the energy. And they, over COVID, were not forced. They actually set up an online platform for artists. It is a artsy type of platform, and it's for all of Africa. And I would honestly recommend just looking digesting. They give independent artists a place to start their own projects, to make their own names. The networks of which they are setting up are fantastic, and they are going from strength to strength. So it has been an absolute pleasure from the get-go to be working with them as well. So we have different co-publishing partners. That is how we are enabling ourselves to think much broader. It's sharing, it's collaboration. It's with people that we don't want to let go of, won't let go of. So we'll carry on. We're just in a different place for the moment. We're still in sabbatical. I don't know how long it is. But so we are all together working on bringing these artworks and bringing these artists into different conversations, allowing people easier access to ask questions. I'm doing quite a number of online Zoom conversations, which I never would have done pre-COVID. I loved being in the studio behind the scenes. There was quite a bit of shouting when I had to move online, but then I realized more than anything else, I've always done this just in the studio. And I love sharing and talking about all these wonderful people, providing them a voice into the next stage, I guess, of where our projects go and how to speak about them. And they're all doing a brilliant job, and they just need to be known about more, I think.
Before we started rolling, you were telling me about how fabulous the art fair was in Joburg for a specific reason. Do you remember, what was it?
When I was working for DK projects, I love working at the art fairs because I love getting the feedback. I love having the conversations. But they're always in these enormous convention centers under fluorescent lights, and day after day is incredibly difficult, as we all know. Latitude's art fair was 5 days long, which is longer, actually, but was a joy. Robbie's background comes from the food, wine, and design fair that was in Johannesburg. So she brought that into the art fair, which meant you had spectacular wine, you had delicious food. It was grown from the farms in the surrounding areas. And Lucy McGarry was the technical director for the Joburg Art Fair for quite a number of years. She was the curator for the South African Pavilion. She used to actually also run David Krut Gallery, and that's how we met each other. So we've known each other a very long time. And both of them have gone from strength to strength. And Lucy's family owns a property called Shepston Gardens, which is a wedding venue, a spectacular one, where her mother has made the most beautiful garden, and her father is a self-trained architect. And so he's made these sandstone and marble, I don't even know how to describe it, actually, but it's kind of a wonderland. And so it extends through this vast garden on this cliffside. And it was a building that will eventually be her gallery on the main floor and a convention center on the second floor with a rooftop garden with a spectacular view of the city. And then a garden that extended to hold a marquee, and then 3 or 4 other venues for having art. So for 5 days, people were allowed in to experience art inside and outside in these spectacular buildings and architecture, and then wander through the garden. So people stayed all day. People were there into the night, absolutely no problem. People asked the most spectacular questions. The feedback was amazing. And because Brendan and I have now been in Canada for 3 years and only back and forth to Johannesburg, it felt like there was a new audience, an interested one, that were asking as many questions as possible. There was a talks program. There were talks throughout the event. They had fashion. They had everything that you can possibly think of. And it was wonderful. It is what Johannesburg needs. It is exactly what Johannesburg offers as well. So in its own spectacular, strange way. There was no parking, so you had to take shuttles, which was also fun. So it meant that you had a chance to speak with everyone as well. So there was something about it unique that you could also, on certain days, you could set up and go out to visit artist studios and things. Everything worked beautifully. It was so nice. And I have to say what a pleasure it was for us to be there, to just be able to experience that with Lucy and Robbie. The joy, actually, in what they were able to, through COVID, move online, and then through the obstacles and the hurdles. There's load shedding that's currently happening in Johannesburg up to 12 hours a day. it isn't an easygoing anything, but it was a real treat. Everything was a real treat. The energy of South Africa can be felt, even though they're going through a hard period.
The way you're talking about the fair is making me think two things. One, that I do love that it feels like it's more than a fair commerce, that there's a buzz about the ecosystem, which we were trying to do here in Baltimore, but it also, all that programming is just making me tired.
Yes.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It was spectacular.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And it was just that Lucy, I loved it. I read an article right as we were in Johannesburg. I spent the day trying to figure out our booth. And so I was just behind the scenes, and I know the team so well. I know Robbie and Lucy for so long, and the technical director, Liesel, she actually used to be Brendan's partner in Parts and Labor in his public sculpture business. So she's now the technical director, and it was just such a joy to work with all of these very skilled people in making something like this happen. And we just figured out, or Lucy dreams big. That's what the article said. Said Lucy dreams really big, and Roberta makes sure that it happens. And I just thought, perfectly put. And it's kind of how Brendan and I work too. There's the practical arm, and then there's the dreamer. And I just always say, but Bren, we should work like this. And he said, you know, that's not always very practical. Or he goes, oh yes, okay, that works. And I said, okay, so you tell me, you kind of pull it in, rein it in. But here's how I think this, and then together let's rein it in. And then not in a bad way. It's okay, how do we make this work? And then he says, well, okay, for this next project now, we exhibited at Latitudes Online when we were in South Africa. We also had a week in studio with William on a new set of their photogravures, direct gravures, self-portraits with Shinkale in the exploration kind of the last year's project moving forward, and then with the next project in mind. So we also went to South Africa with two curators from Saskatoon, from the Remy Modern, which is a spectacular museum. I always compare it to the size of, in South Africa, the Norval Foundation, which is quite a spectacular place in Cape Town. But it has wonderful spaces, and it's in a city of 250,000 people, and a spectacular place where they show local work, but also a lot of international projects. So Nick Cave's The Spinning Forest is currently in the foyer. We have Stan Douglas up at the moment. We have Denise Tomazzo, and a Picasso print collection of 410 linocut prints.
Good Lord.
The biggest Picasso collection in the world, because the expert in Picasso prints was Frederick Mulder, who is from Saskatchewan.
Oh, I didn't know he was from Saskatchewan. Oh my gosh.
I had the pleasure of meeting him because he's a friend of David Krut's. So Brendan and I took him around, I think, the first or second Johannesburg Art Fair over 10 years ago. And it is very funny how many people come from Saskatchewan and the prairies, and how many people do leave them. The winter is very difficult, but it can also be seen as a nurturing time. It's cold, so you nest. But that's what I found more the sabbatical component to anything, is that I have time to think things through. And the museum here is spectacular. So the two curators came with us, and we showed them everything that South Africa and Johannesburg in particular have to offer.
Oh, sign me up for a tour with Jill and Brendan.
Yeah, I would love to take you. Our project,
wow.
The Griffin with Lisa Baldessera, all came together because she came to South Africa in February 2020 and spent 2 weeks with us. And it was much the same. We were in Johannesburg and Cape Town, and we explored as much as we could. So it was the same now, with the intention that we have a project, Jillian Ross Print, at the Remy Modern next year from April onwards.
Wow.
Very exciting. Yes.
That is.
Yes.
Good gracious, woman.
Busy.
You are busy.
Yeah, it's been busy. I like trying to figure out all these projects, and I love talking to different printmakers to try to figure all of these little pieces out. So I am also looking for here a team of people that will help me, because we will be setting up a studio at the Ramey Modern for next year to show people how this is done.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But I keep feeling like you're saying the sabbatical in Saskatoon. Are you at some point going to move back to Joburg?
It's always a possibility. This cycle might be 10 years. I don't know. I had a very hard time leaving Johannesburg. So in my mind, I haven't quite left. And I think it's in these small increments that help me to digest how to look at it. We fit seamlessly back in when we're there. I have spent half my life in Canada and half my life in Johannesburg. So it is very much a part of me. It's very much a part of my husband. That's where he's from. My children, where they're born. So it's very important we move between the two. I say home for both places.
Okay. Do you have advice for people trying to get into your line of biz?
I started as an intern. 5 out of the 6 printers at the David Krut Workshop started as interns. To me, the best way is trial and error. It's not the same apprenticeships that we once had. It is literally learning on the job, and you find out very quickly if you like it or don't. You find out very quickly if you want to be an artist or if you want to kind of nurture the technical side. And you asked me earlier if I think of myself as an artist. I know I am. It's just that there's something about the technical that kind of allows me to hide behind that sometimes too. And I also always talk about the fact that I'm not the most technical person on any one of the projects, but I can oversee everything because I know enough about the technical. And then I like to just explore it in different ways than other people. I don't like to tell an artist how to make something. I like them to figure it out so that there's something that's unique. I'll guide them, but I don't say, hold this in your hand in this specific way. I find that very limiting. I never say no to someone, even though I'm thinking, ooh, I don't know how we're going to do that. So I love that. And I find that if you're a technician, then you'll go, no, that can't happen because of this, this, and this. And then I look at that person and I go, mm-hmm. And they go, oh, I see that look.
Here she comes.
Yeah, they'll stop. On the Triumphs and the Men, some of our wood blocks started coming apart. And William and I loved it because it had this feeling of something that you can't get any other way than by a mistake or or something that it opens a door. And Sabongiseni and Chad thought, but we can't edition this. And I asked Phil, Phil, I'm making a print out of 77 pieces of paper. Do they all have to look exactly the same? Because I don't really, these blocks, I don't know how to make this happen. And he said, do you remember, it's the feel of it. The feel of it has to stay the same. And so as an overall, if it's 77 sheets of paper, if it's not 100% perfect, but it's spectacular. So it's those small little conversations. So to me, that's what you learn when you come into the shop. You get to witness all of that. And all of these studios allow interns. They all do because they all want to let people experience that joy and see if that's what you want to do. I had an artist call yesterday. She's in Belgium at the moment. Her name is Robin Penn. These are her prints behind me. This is a big project we did a number of years ago. Also spectacular works. And she's doing a residency at the France Mausoleum Center at the moment. And she said, wow, no one told me how hard it was to print lithographs and on my own. And I said, okay, well, so you learned that. She goes, there's no one here I can talk to. They're not collaborators. Everyone's a printer. Can you give me some feedback? And I said, yeah, of course I will. And then she just said, I have decided for sure that I love it when someone else prints something for me. I know, but now, and not everyone does. There are a lot of very technical printmakers that make their own works. I find sometimes they are so technical, though, that they look like they could be a photograph. And so I think sometimes in those combinations of the technician and the artist and trying to work together, you don't know what the other person's picture in their mind is necessarily. So you have to figure it out. And all of these spectacular things happen along the way. So that's, I think, worth experiencing. I find that any artist who comes in the doors, if they love it, they never leave. So if you're working with 100 artists and now you've added another one, now it's 101 artists you're working with. And those that don't like it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But
right.
yeah, everything comes out backwards, so some people are like, but I only want my drawing to tilt to the right, like it always does. I don't want it to tilt to the left. And William loves it because it's just a translation. Everything's a translation of something else. And he can work from sculpture and then paint something onto copper plates, and then it's the same image translated, and then he can play around with it. And an idea emerges from that. It's like everything that's on the periphery, So if you're making something for someone and they come in and go, oh, wow, that one, ooh, that one, then immediately they have something to respond to, that call and response.
Right.
Yeah.
I never really thought about the relationship with the printer as being the call and response, but you're absolutely right. That's a great way to put it. I like it. I find that not every printer is happy to stand and talk to people, I think you have a special gift, I think, that is unusual, which includes being able to explain things very beautifully and clearly, but also, and this may have been because you kind of grew into your professional power under Kentridge's watch, this kind of openness to shifting and accommodating and loving mistake, and that doesn't happen for a lot of people. So I feel like you're kind of a unicorn.
Oh, thank you. I think it's important for me to say I wasn't always like this. I couldn't. I was the quietest, most nervous person in the room. I just have a very good poker face. So that helps. And David, very early on in my career, forced me to speak to everyone that came through the door. It was always about education, and nobody knew what a print was. So people would be allowed into the studio no matter what, and I would have to stop whatever I was doing and talk to them. And I erased one of William's plates once upon a time by accident because I was talking. And I remember I phoned William after I cried. And this was very early on. And I said, I'm sorry, I've erased this plate today. I didn't say why. I just said I did. And he said, this is not the greatest tragedy in the history of art. Please bring me another one. And it was in understanding that if you make a mistake, you can acknowledge it. That's okay. I know how hard it is for an artist to come into a studio and put their mistakes out on the table or show people how they work and how hard that is. I still experience that all the time, especially in the way that I set up the studio so that people could learn. I allowed them the time to learn, and I managed the project. So I would have to come in and guide them every day, but so that they got the chance to actually learn, so that they could edition work with confidence, so that they could mix colors with confidence, so that I could raise my two children in the studio and not be printing all the day because it's a different kind of exhaustion. So we worked together like that. And I have to say, William would bring in any number of curators on a daily basis. He would bring people in and we would talk to them. David brought people in, we would talk to them. It has been the actual joy that I've had in the studio. I saw someone yesterday in Regina who just visited the David Krut Workshop who was just saying how wonderfully they experienced it the last time they were there. So it's the same handing that down. So it's hard. It takes 2 years for you to be able to wipe a plate and talk to someone at the same time. I tested to see if it's consistent. And it is, but it allows you the ability to work with your artists so much better because you can talk to them and you're not thinking about what you're doing at the same time. You're just doing it because you've set it up so you can do it. So thank you for those compliments. It does come from all of those people and all of those parties. William just does it so eloquently as well. I've had the privilege of listening to him for so long, and anyone understands at any level everything of which he's speaking about. So to be around that all of the time also is like a real treasure.
Yeah, I think that my piece of advice for young people is, don't panic because you and me who find it incredibly easy to talk and do things at the same time, it comes with time. It's learned. And I wasn't a good speaker when I was in college. I sucked. And it was just having to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And suddenly here I am.
Everything is practice, and everything is trial and error. And hopefully you don't have that spectacular error, but that's also okay. Because it happens. Yeah. And I'm 20 years this year. Wow. Yeah, 20 years I've been doing this now. So speaking publicly for only 10. I remember being at the Milwaukee print conference, the Print Make, with Jessica. And she was the one who had me do my first presentation overseas. That was much harder. And I was pregnant. It's quite something.
Yeah. It's nerve-wracking. Yeah, that's what my advice piece always boils down to. Get over your fear of public speaking as fast as you can.
I think sometimes people can these days. I think that Instagram and speaking to it, I don't know how people do that because it is very difficult. And sometimes speaking on Zoom conversations when there's a large amount of people, you are speaking into a void. That is also really difficult. But sometimes for some people it might be much easier than standing in front of a crowd. So I also think at the art fairs, those informal conversations are very helpful. So that the art fair platforms, please do not give up, even if they are difficult. It's such good spaces for the artists and for the printmakers and for the audience to engage with all of the above. From South Africa, it's a commercial background. Everything is commercial. And in Canada, everything is funded. And it is entirely different. I've loved the differences, comparing them and trying to work them out. And also being seen as an entrepreneur here is really interesting. The support actually is amazing. Whereas David Krut has been this pioneer who's been leading the way for over 20 years. The studio has been open for over 20 years now. Artist Proof Studio and the Artist Press have been around for 30 years. And now there is a handful of younger studios coming up. And it is wonderful to see because of just that generosity. And all of those printers have been trained at those 3 spaces, actually. All of the new studios. They all come from all of these, these pioneers in the field that have just pushed and pushed and pushed. And they're doing spectacular work. So please go visit Latitudes Online. go visit the art fair. Go to Baltimore Art Fair. I would love to come. Also.
Oh, I know. We'd love to have you.
I almost have now. I've been focusing on production for 3 years. I have been now finally moving some of the prints from South Africa into Canada, which is also, like a wonderful joy. It's just taken quite a long time. Thankfully, I have Brendan, who just does not stop persevering in shipments and conversations. So I also welcome anyone to reach out and ask questions. I think young people can do all of these things, and it's actually much easier to do so because of social media and Instagram but all of us still want the conversation. We want to help. Printmaking isn't, it's still not mainstream. So you still do want to carry on, how people can learn and how they can reach out. I love listening to your podcast. I thought that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you have a really nice, interesting selection of people. And I would love to give you a handful more if you are interested.
Oh, I'm up for it for sure.
Well, and that I can tell. And that I think is I don't know. I think it's providing a voice and a platform. It takes courage to do that. You ask a lot of questions and you're also unpacking a lot of what was behind closed doors. The transparency is so refreshing.
Yeah, that's always been number one for me is demystifying all this, highfalutin art world stuff. And it's really easy to do in the print world because everybody wants to share and tell and talk. And, it's a happy corner of the art world in my book, as you have all heard me say. So we're going to, just going to keep doing it.
Please. Yeah. I loved listening to Julia DeMario. And just on how she and Jim Dine work together and how it's much the same as how William and I, it's kind of that you do it because you enjoy doing it. So there's time in between, but you're working on other things, and then you just enjoy it even more when you come together. In these last 3 years of being away from William, I have made still this almost the same amount of work with him, which I don't know how not. over my entire career, I think I had 1 month where I wasn't working on something of William's.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I was in Canada in COVID, I handed over some of my responsibilities via WhatsApp to Sabongiseni Kulu in Johannesburg. And so having him moved up from what he was thinking to then how I was thinking has also been quite a wonderful thing, to show. So that's why, I mean, like conversations, one-on-one conversations for young people too are important. I think since there's so much competition. And so listen to how people have navigated a path and then can fork easily, because this isn't easy. In Canada, the studios are really spread. People, when I say, well, we're in Saskatoon, they said, where? It's like, in the prairies, in the center. Why? That's what I get a lot. Why? I said, well, this is one of the only places where we can make this work. We can't move to Toronto and open a studio and find a space that we can afford. You can't move to Vancouver and do that. Here we have family and friends, but we can also make all of it happen. We're not sitting in traffic. So maybe that's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's where I'm going to choose where I live because of the traffic. It's great. I've not been to South Africa. It's been on my list for a long time, so I'm going to keep it there, see what I can do.
We'll let you know the next time we're going. Maybe just come.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be exciting. I love this idea of you as this new connection point between a place that's so far away geographically from you, but it sounds so pat and trite or something about cultural interchange or something, but it's so wonderful, where the globe is shrinking, and just to have that kind of connection across the ocean, I think it's really wonderful. So I applaud your efforts.
Thank you. It's not easy. But as I said, most things are incremental. So a lot of screaming, really, and also a lot of heartbreak. So I think that it's, and I hope that comes through in conversation, is the actual care. And that's what more than anything else is that you find a community. I was at a conference this weekend, and it was the Prairie Art Network. And I thought, what Prairie Art Network? Not in a rude way, but everyone is so isolated, working on their own things, that I thought, fantastic, actually. I can't wait to hear what this is. And I've been gone from Saskatchewan forever. I've only looked up and started to reach out here now in the last few months, because I just had my head down working. But it was quite wonderful to hear about how education has changed and Indigenous practices coming into everybody's work. And then the combined sharing. It's about empathy, and it's about literally trying to be those bridges to make something easier for someone to connect to be able to connect to a bigger picture. Because I'm in North America, I'm on an easier time zone to do that. I can also connect quite a number of different people to others in South Africa that can very capably do the work at a much more affordable price right now. And what South Africa needs more than anything else is to be able to bring the art that is created there to a larger audience. And there has been a focus on African art, which nobody likes the term, but rather art from Africa, because there are so many places. And with Lucy's platform, it's enabling those kinds of artists to reach bigger networks. Cynthia's work, she has only had one exhibition at the Goodman Gallery in Johannesburg, and everything else has been from all of her other exhibitions are everywhere else in the world at the moment. And so she's gone from strength to strength in 3 years because her work is just getting better and better, because she's part of the current conversation, and because of the opportunities of museum exhibitions. And so not just commercial shows, but museum exhibitions and international platforms that are allowing her the voice and the space to grow, and then mentoring her in a different way. So Lucy and Robbie also are they have a select number of artists that they work so closely with. So they're not their gallery representation, but they are their artist project partners. So that kind of difference is quite nice. And then it's fun also. So the travel has been really interesting. William's projects, people have been fascinated by how vast they are, how long they are. And that's actually quite a wonderful thing to be able to teach people. But remember, it's taken 20 years. So those projects weren't always like that. People say, well, you've been guiding William for such a long time. No. that took a lot of time to work on just having a voice that can speak up, to speak to him. I learned a lot from him. I stumbled into the door of David Krut Workshop, but really, I've had the most amazing mentors, really. And that isn't always possible. And so some of those bigger cities, that feels as though it might be more possible, but the smaller cities actually are where the artists normally go.
That's true. Well, that is true.
Yeah.
A good point.
And you need to practice with hands-on, you need hands-on.
Okay. So what we're saying to you, young people, is really primarily, well, you have to get experience, obviously, but making connections with people, the networking, which sounds stupid, but is really important, that can change your entire life just by meeting a person like Jill or a person like William or whoever, David Krut, that you have to be open to people, and you can only be open. That's why you should come to Baltimore for the fair, to meet all those people.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's such a great place to meet all of these print shops, is at a fair, because they're just standing there captive right in front of you. Right.
And yes. And the projects that are currently being made. So you can ask, and what I find hardest is being able to speak about the projects I'm working on right this minute, not the older ones. It gives you time to digest the work that you've made. So I can speak about the older projects much more easily than I can about the current one.
Sure.
But it provides you to ask those printers as many questions as possible, because they want to talk about them because they're fresh in their minds. And the printers, the people from the workshop, will talk to you forever. And then if you want to understand something from more of a summary point of view, that's when you start talking with some of the dealers rather than the workshops, which I think is a nice combination that I saw at the IFPDA, and I know that you have at Baltimore, is that you have those two different voices, because the dealers also can summarize projects in a way that the workshop people can't. And that's just because they have a different aspect. It's not all about the technical. It's about where the work is situated in the world, in the artist's career. And you can ask those kinds of questions. And arts administration actually is much bigger, or bigger opportunities than just being an artist. You can be an artist
Sure.
as well as supporting yourself by being in arts administration. And then you learn both of those skill sets, actually. By interning with William's projects, a lot of the artists that David Krut Workshop is currently working with, Heidi Farid, Nina Tor, quite a number of them actually, Pebo Fatso Makwina, they were all part of William's projects, carving some of his plates, working with that team of people, so there's trust already. So you can also you can intern to be part of a team of people who do carving sometimes. I brought in a lot of different people.
When we were... last thing, because we've been talking for a blissful hour and a half. Before we started talking on air, you were telling me about a certain purchase person, a person who's wanted to buy something but was afraid to buy the new thing and wanted something that was secondary market.
I love this conversation. Brendan kept saying, why were you speaking for so long? And I said, because I think I need to understand how he sees things, and then I need him to understand how I see things. And it was a collector who had been regularly going to the art auctions to purchase his work, but he wasn't. And this was at the Latitudes Art Fair. So he said, but I haven't seen any of these artists on the secondary market. And I said, yet? Like that, very kind of, like very quickly. I said, yet. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, they're not on the secondary market yet. People have to see the work and buy the work and invest in the work, and the artists so that there is first and foremost, the artwork is collected, and then it gets put onto the market only much later. And so that means that the collector who is purchasing the work in the first place has to trust in the work in which they're looking at. We started talking about it because I said in Canada, there's funding opportunities and it's less commercial. And I come from a commercial background in South Africa where there are no funding opportunities, really. It's all commercial sales. So it's very different, and they're very different comparisons. And so if someone's going to go to the secondary market, the work is already going to be priced up here because someone else tells you that it's valuable. Whereas if you're going around and you trust your eye, it's not easy to trust your eye. So that's why if you talk to the workshops are looking at artists at least, I don't want to say that, that's too presumptuous. They're looking at artists that I was going to say at least 10 years before they're making big things. But in actual fact, they're always finding the new artists who are saying things, who have a voice and who are strong. So when you're investing in a print, it's not a reproduction. You're investing in an artist. You're investing in a workshop who's already the voice. So the artist, you may not know, but the workshop, if you do know them, you know they've been around for a long time. The quality of the work is there. So then the third thing would be like you have to speak to as many people to understand where the artist situates themselves in their career. And what's nice about the art auctions, for those of us in the workshops, it's not always, I try to give them information on the prints if they come up on auctions so that they at least have the correct information. But what they do well is that they do their research normally very well. And they can speak very highly about, but mostly masters, not the newer works. So that's where we have to fill in the gaps because there isn't as much written history on it. So once they're doing that research, then the price obviously goes up on the work. So if you invest when the work's being made, then that's your best investment opportunity. And that's what I was speaking to that man about, because I said they're not on the secondary market yet, and they're coming straight from the workshop. I can authenticate that this is a good piece of work. If you don't like the image, don't purchase it. And so also when artists work in more than one image, then you have an archive to choose from. And that's when I think also it's more successful for any artist. And that's why we've always tried to work with artists in series as much as possible, so that it's not just one print. But if people can pick their favorite, then they have something and a story that they can speak about. And that's when I think it's really worthwhile in trying to maybe change somebody's approach to how they see.
Well, and the other point you made, correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, but the other thing about buying the thing that hasn't yet gotten to the secondary market is that the money will go to the artist. And after the secondary market or third market or whatever, however many times it turns over on the market, yes, the artist gets absolutely zero after that.
Yeah. And a lot of the arts already, like we're all doing a lot of things for free. And I know that comes hand in hand with any number of other professions. And we do that out of the passion for doing it as well. And providing the platforms for people to understand it a little bit more. You do always get labeled, oh, they're the artist in the family. And that's when people go, oh. They do things differently. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, why am I always doing things differently? I don't know. And it's not because I'm an artist. It's just who I am also. So, I don't know. But you can carry on doing that. And one of the things that on one of the talks too at Latitudes was about game changers. And he just said, like, try things. It's William's safe space for stupidity. I think about those two things all the time. I said, why am I doing this? This looks so silly. This is dumb, kind of. And then someone else will go, well, what about this from that? Or, and so you're like, oh, okay, there's a reason. There is a reason. You do need to always do that. And you need to push as hard as you can push so that you stand out. That's also the difference. So if you stand out really early on for an audience that doesn't understand necessarily, if they like it or they don't like it, at least you're standing somewhere. It's not just, so just try. Like, just carry on trying. Nothing, self-taught. And so what? That's what I have kind of grown to understand. So I like learning what the technical terms are for things that I've been exploring. or I love how open people are, but like just have a little bit of confidence in the fact that you'll get there. As a collector, as an artist, as a printer, it all just takes time. And I think the more collectors that we can start from early ages, and that means all of these children have to go into art museums. They have to make them their homes again, which they haven't. Here at the Ramey Modern too, it's by donation only, so it's free. The entrance is free. And the high school students have, instead of hanging out at the mall, they're at the gallery.
What?
There are that many spaces. This place, I don't know what to compare it to, but we'll put photos in this.
Yeah, for sure.
It's spectacular. And they have
I'm intrigued.
Education component. Schools are always coming in, but the teenagers are in there and they're hanging out because they have so many different spaces. They can go every weekend and there's something new. And there's a local restaurant in there. They have a gift shop. There's so many creative people out there. Fashion needs as much support, actually, as the arts as well. So I go around.
True enough.
That's what I do even for South Africa. This is Guillotine, a very good friend of mine in Johannesburg who deserves all the support and recognition. She's doing wonderful things. I think that a lot of international things are happening. William's episodic series premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last year. So we're making the prints here in Canada, in Alberta, and the support is being found in Toronto and in Canada for the rest of the series. So those are really interesting links because we are so far away. Canada is, when I moved to South Africa, somebody said to me, can you go further? I'm not sure I can.
It has always looked amazing to me. So it's on my list. All right. Well, Jillian, thank you for coming on Platemark. I so enjoyed talking to you. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed talking to you too. And every time. And I do, no, at the art fair also is what I meant.
This is our second time doing this conversation, everybody, because we had technical trouble the first time.
You're just like, I'm so sorry.
Well, we'll see if this one works.
Maybe this was the better conversation, but it was also nice of being able to listen to each other. That's all.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with Jillian Ross. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. She's a delight, and I thank her so much for coming on the show for a second time, actually. Our first time around, the audio didn't go well, so I had to can the whole thing. Any images that we talk about, as I said at the top, are over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. And also do me a favor and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps people discover us, and building an audience is ongoing. It will always be ongoing, I guess. A special thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, and also one to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for helping me with sound, which is sometimes beyond me. Okay, I think that's it. We will see you next time.